The Avadhuta Gita. The Shrutis declare in various ways that this, the ether and its like, and we ourselves are like a mirage. If there is only one, indivisible, all-comprehensive absolute, how can there be the comparable and comparison? The Supreme is without divisibility and indivisibility. The Supreme is without activity and changeability. If there is only one indivisible, all-comprehensive absolute, how can there be worship? How can there be austerity? The mind is verily supreme, undivided, all-pervasive and devoid of largeness and smallness. The mind is indeed the indivisible, all-comprehensive absolute. How can we do anything with the mind and speech? The self is the negation of the distinction between night and day. The self is the negation of the risen and the not risen. If there is only one indivisible, all-comprehensive absolute, how can there be the sun, moon, and fire? The self is that from which the distinction of desire and desirelessness, of action and inaction, are gone. If there is only one indivisible, all-comprehensive absolute, how can there be consciousness differentiated by exterior and interior? If the self is devoid of essence and lack of essence, if it is without void and non-void, if there is only one indivisible, all-comprehensive absolute, how can there be a first? How can there be a last? If the self is the negation of difference and non-difference, if it is the negation of the knower and the knowable, if there is only one indivisible, all-comprehensive absolute, how can there be the third? How can there be the fourth? The spoken and the unspoken are not the truth. The known and the unknown are not the truth. If there is only one indivisible, all-comprehensive absolute, how can there be objects, senses, mind, and intellect? Ether and air are not the truth. Earth and fire are not the truth. If there is only one indivisible, all-comprehensive absolute, how can there be cloud? How can there be water? If the self is the negation of imagined worlds, if it is the negation of imagined gods, if there is only one indivisible, all-comprehensive absolute, how can there be discriminating consciousness of good and evil? The self is the negation of death and deathlessness. It is the negation of action and inaction. If there is only one indivisible, all-comprehensive absolute, how can one speak of coming and going? No such distinctions exist as Prakti and Purusha. There is no difference between cause and effect. If there is only one indivisible, all-comprehensive absolute, how can one speak of self and not self? There is no coming of the third kind of misery or the second kind of misery due to the gunas. If there is only one indivisible, all-comprehensive absolute, how can there be the old man, a young man, and infant? The Supreme is without caste and stage of life, without cause and agent. If there is only one indivisible, all-comprehensive absolute, how can there be consciousness of the destroyed and the undestroyed? The destroyed and the undestroyed are both false. The born and the unborn are both false. If there is only one indivisible, all-comprehensive absolute, how can there be the perishable and the imperishable? The self is the annihilation of the masculine and the non-masculine. It is the annihilation of the feminine and the non-feminine. If there is only one indivisible, all-comprehensive absolute, how can there be consciousness of joy and lack of joy? If the Supreme is free of delusion and sorrow, doubt and grief, if there is only one indivisible, all-comprehensive absolute, how can there be I and mine? If the Supreme is full of delusion and sorrow, doubt and grief, if there is only one indivisible, all-comprehensive absolute, how can there be I and mine? The Supreme is the destruction of virtue and vice. It is the destruction of bondage and freedom from bondage. If there is only one indivisible, all-comprehensive absolute, how can there be here any consciousness of sorrow and the absence of sorrow? No distinction of sacrificer and sacrifice exists. No distinction of fire and ingredients exists. If there is only one indivisible, all-comprehensive absolute, how can there be any fruits of work? The self is verily free from sorrow and absence of sorrow. The free is self from pride and the absence of pride. If there is only one indivisible, all-comprehensive absolute, how can there be consciousness of attachment and non-attachment? No such change as illusion and freedom from illusion exists. No such change as greed and freedom from greed exists. If there is only one indivisible, all-comprehensive absolute, how can there be consciousness of discrimination and lack of discrimination? There are never any you and I. The discrimination of family and race is false. I am indeed the absolute and the supreme truth. In that case, how can I make salutation? The self is that in which the distinction of teacher and disciple disappears, and in which the consideration of instruction also disappears. I am indeed the absolute and the supreme truth. In that case, how can I make salutation? There is no imagined division of bodies. There is no imagined division of worlds. I am indeed the absolute and the supreme truth. In that case, how can I make salutation? The self, never endowed with passion or devoid of it, is verily spotless, immovable, and pure. I am indeed the absolute and the supreme truth. In that case, how can I make salutation? No distinction such as body and bodilessness exists, nor is it true that there is false action. I am indeed the absolute and the supreme truth. In that case, how can I make salutation? When one knows nothing, there is verily no versification. The Supreme One, pure of thought, absorbed in the consciousness of the homogeneous being, prattles about the truth. Chapter 7. The enlightened one, nude or clad in a patched garment of rags gathered from roads, followed the path which is devoid of virtue and stays in an empty abode, absorbed in the pure, stainless, homogeneous being. The enlightened one aims at that which is without any mark or marklessness. He is skillful, being devoid of right and wrong. He is the absolute truth, stainless and pure. How can the liberated one engage in discussion and disputation? Free from entrapment in the snares of hope, devoid of purifactory ceremonies, the enlightened one is ever absorbed in the absolute. Thus, having renounced all, he is the truth, pure and stainless. How can there be any discussion here of the body and disembodiment, of attachment and detachment? He is the truth itself. In its spontaneous, natural, pure form, immovable, like the sky. Where the truth is known, how can there be form and formlessness? Where there is the Supreme, whose form is like the sky, how is perception of any object possible? The Supreme Self is indivisible, of the form of the sky. It is the truth, pure and stainless. Thus how can there be here difference and non-difference, bondage and freedom from bondage, transformation and division? Here is only the absolute truth, indivisible and the all. How can there be here union, disunion, or pride? If thus, there is here only the Supreme, the indivisible and the all, how can there be any substance or absence of substance? Here is the absolute truth, indivisible and pure, stainless, and the all of the form of the sky. Thus, how can there be here association and disassociation? The enlightened one is a yogi devoid yoga and the absence of yoga. He is an enjoyer devoid of enjoyment and absence of enjoyment. Thus, he wanders leisurely, filled with the spontaneous joy of his own mind. If the yogi is always related to knowledge and perception, to duality and unity, how can he be free here? How can a yogi be natural and free from attachment here? He is the enjoyer of the pure, stainless, and homogeneous being. The self is destruction, devoid of the destroyed and the undestroyed. The self is the auspicious moment, devoid of the auspicious and inauspicious time. Thus, how can there be here substance in the absence of substance? The truth, which is homogeneous, is of the form of sky. Forever divested of all and united to the self, the enlightened one is the all, free and devoid of truth. Thus, how can there be here life and death? And how can there be any accomplishment through meditation and lack of meditation? All this is magic, like a mirage in the desert. Only the absolute self of indivisible and impenetrable form exists. To all things, from the practice of religious laws and duties to liberation, we are completely indifferent. How can we have anything to do with attachment or detachment? Only the learned imagine these things. Where one knows nothing, there is verily no versification. The Supreme One, pure of thought, absorbed in the consciousness of the homogeneous being, prattles about the truth. Chapter 8. By making my pilgrimage to thee, thy all-pervasiveness has been destroyed by me. With my meditation, thy transcendence of the mind has been destroyed. Thy transcendence of speech has been destroyed by my singing thy praise. Ever forgive me these 3 sins. The sage is one whose intelligence is unsmitten by lusts, who is self-controlled, gentle, and pure, who possesses nothing, who is indifferent, who eats moderately, is quiet and steady, and has taken refuge in me. The sage is vigilant and resolute, has a profound mind, and has conquered the 6 bondages. He is not proud, but gives honor to others. He is strong, friendly to all, compassionate, and wise. The sage is merciful, non-violent, and enduring of all. He is pure-hearted and is the essence of truth. He is the same to all and beneficent to all. The sign of an Avadhuta should be known by the Blessed Ones, by those who know the truth of the significance of the letters of the Vedas and who teach Veda and Vedanta. The significance of the letter A is that the Avadhuta is free from the bondage of hopes, is pure in the beginning, middle, and end, and dwells ever in joy. The syllable Va is indicative of him by whom all desires have been renounced, whose speech is wholesome, and who dwells in the present. The syllable Du is a sign of him whose limbs are gray with dust, whose mind is purified, who is free from all diseases and who is released from the practice of concentration and meditation. The syllable Ta is significant of him by whom the thought of truth has been made steady, who is devoid of all thoughts and efforts, and who is free from ignorance and egoism. This Gita or song is composed by Dattatreya Avadhuta, who is the embodiment of bliss. Whoever reads or hears it has never any rebirth. One who has realized the self is never reborn. Om